Good morning, everyone. That was excellent. I was expecting after the dinner last night a little bit less enthusiasm, so thank you. Welcome to Evolve Day 2. This is navigation patterns in Xamarin Forms. I'm Rob Gibbens. If you happen to have taken this yesterday, it's going to be the same class, so it's repeat content, but hopefully you can get something out of it. There was a little bit of confusion yesterday about the webinar. People were asking, why would we need a webinar when we're sitting right in front of this big, huge screens? The point of the webinar is for you to ask questions during the session, and we have TAs and other instructors who will answer those questions. We only have 40 minutes to present all the content, so I don't really have time to stop in the middle and ask and answer questions. That's what we have the TAs for. So join the webinar here, and there'll be a chat room. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask in there, and we'll get to those. All right, so like I said, we're going to be talking about navigation patterns in Xamarin Forms. And out in the world today, this is a very common sight. Just crowds of people staring down at their phones, not interacting with the world around them. And I'm guessing somebody's probably on their phone right now. I saw somebody. So I do it too, all the time. I try not to, but I do. And it's a sign of how engaging and immersive these apps are and how engaging the devices are. We have these little portable supercomputers in our pockets. And according to a recent study, we spend 3 hours a day staring at our phones. Now, hopefully that's not all at once, but over the course of a day. And that's up from 2.5 hours last year. And I expect it'll probably keep going up for a while. 14% of that time is spent just surfing the web, which I thought was very low, which means in 86% of the time, we're in native apps. And that's a lot. So it's our job as developers to make those native apps as engaging as possible. We want to choose the navigation patterns and the design that is going to keep our users in those apps and ignoring everyone else around them. So when we're designing our apps, we have a lot of choices to make regarding the user experience. We need to have really nice colors and fonts, obviously. We need to display our content so that the users can find it. We need to position buttons and interaction points where we can easily reach them, which gets harder as the devices get bigger. And we need to design the systems that will allow people to successfully navigate our content and all of the screens of our application. So today we're going to go over a few of those navigation patterns that are used on all 3 major mobile platforms: Android, iPhone, and Windows Phone. And we're going to be doing this with Xamarin Forms. While every app has the same patterns to choose from, I'm going to give you a few different options of how you can use these patterns and how you can combine these patterns to provide the best experience for your unique application. We're going to be working on a conference application to guide us through the Evolve conference. This is not going to be anywhere near as the actual Evolve conference that you all have, but we'll see how the navigation choices that we make will affect the experience of using the application. We're going to begin with what's probably the most common navigation pattern on all the platforms, which is a stack hierarchy of navigation pages. And we're going to do this with the navigation page in Xamarin Forms. Then we're going to move on to using tabs to display our content and partition the content into separate sections. And then we'll move on to the master detail page. And finally, we'll finish with the carousel page. Now, as I just mentioned, stack navigation is the most common navigation pattern used on the 3 platforms. Even if you haven't called it by this name, I'm sure you've implemented this in one of your apps, or at least you've seen it and used it on one of the devices. The user will be presented with a screen. They'll make some kind of a choice, either clicking a button or clicking a row in a list, and they'll be navigated to a new screen. And then the system will provide some way to get back, usually a back button, either a software back button on iOS or a hardware back button on a Windows Phone and Android. So these systems of navigation can be found in data menus, in any kind of hierarchy of content. We see this a lot in settings screens and things like that. Well, in Xamarin Forms, the navigation page class provides this basic stack navigation. Again, after we provide it an initial view to present, any subsequent clicks will cause the new views, the new pages, to be pushed onto the navigation pages stack. You can continue to push as many new pages as you want onto the screen, and then you can drill down into the relationships between your content. On iOS, this is going to use a UI navigation controller natively, and on Windows Phone and Android, we're basically swapping the content in and out. So Android uses fragments, and Windows Phone just replaces the content. Using the navigation page in your code is fairly simple. In here in the app class, where we're calling getMainPage, which is the initial call in your application, we're going to just return a new navigation page. And again, this is a built-in class. The navigation page doesn't provide any user interface by itself, though. On iOS, you get a title bar, but that's about it. So we need to add at least one page onto the stack in order to present our screen. And we're going to do that here with a new main page. So we pass that page in. That page is now the root of our hierarchy. And when we navigate backwards, on iPhone at least, we're going to stop at that page. And the page base class in Xamarin Forms provides a navigation property. So you have this navigation property in every single page that you have in your application. But if you're not using a navigation page, then this property will just be null. In this case, we are using a navigation page. So we can use the navigation.pushAsync method to transition to the next page. Notice that this method is async, which is good because some of the platforms, they're going to animate to the new page, which could take a few CPU cycles. So we want to use async and wait for that. Now, I mentioned the systems all provide a back button automatically, either software or hardware. Well, sometimes we might want to hide that navigation, and we'll take over the navigation ourselves. So we can programmatically go back as well. This is just a stack in the computer science term, so we can pop back up the stack. And here we have just await navigation.popAsync. We can also display a screen as a modal. A modal is going to be a full screen page that will overlay your current content instead of navigating to the new content, and then the user will have to dismiss the modal page in order to get back. And we call that just by navigation.pushModalAsync, and then we pass that new page. So let's switch over to Xamarin Studio and IDE and Visual Studio here. And we'll take a look at what this looks like to begin with. So here I just have a regular Xamarin Forms application. It's basically file new application. And we see in my app class, I have the getMainPage, and I'm returning that navigation page with a new menu page. This menu page here, because we're building a conference application, is just going to display a list of what our navigation choices are. So sessions, speakers, rooms, topics, etc. And then we're going to bind that to a list view. In order to navigate to the next page, when somebody selects one of those menu items, we wire up the item selected event. Notice that is async again. And then I just have a little helper method where I'm going to get the string of what we selected, either sessions, speakers, or rooms, etc. And I'll translate that into an actual page object. But then we'll do navigation.pushAsync. And if I go to the speakers page, actually the speaker detail page here, you see I actually have a button called Show Sessions. And if we look at the code behind for that, when that button is clicked, we're now going to also push async, and we're going to go back to the sessions page. So we have the ability to drill deeper and deeper and filter that content. So I'm going back to the sessions page in this case and passing the currently selected speaker, which is only going to show their sessions. All right, so I'll run this on Android first. We'll take a look at this. All right, so there's our menu. And that's the first thing that we see when we launch the application. And that is our navigation for the whole system. We can click one of the items. Obviously, we can navigate down. Android always has this back button down here, this software back button. But with Xamarin Forms, you get something different than if you just use Xamarin Android. You also get a back button at the top in the same place that the iOS has it. So we can click back there as well. If we click speakers, I'll biasly choose mine, and we can click show sessions, and you can see now we're at the sessions page. And I can keep drilling down as well. And this is going to maintain the whole hierarchy for me. So I don't have to manage the hierarchy, I don't have to manage transitioning between the screens, I don't have to manage going back up the stack. All that's built in and handled. So we'll look at the same application here on iOS. So again, the same thing. And I'm sure you've seen plenty of apps that have this navigation metaphor. Drilling down into content, coming back. And again, the Settings app in iOS is a great example of this. And of course, we don't want to leave out Windows Phone, so we'll jump over to Visual Studio and do the same thing here. And we'll use the hardware back button in Windows Phone. All right, so that's the basic stack navigation. Like I said, that's very, very common. You're going to use that a lot. By itself, it might not be the best navigation pattern for your entire application, but you can easily combine that with the others as well. All right, so next we're going to look at using tabs to separate and organize our content. With tabs, the user is going to choose between different sections of content and different functions in the application by selecting a tab. The current tab is highlighted, and it gives a little bit of context to what the user is actually looking at. And again, I'm sure you've seen tabs in just about every application that you've used. They're very common. Most of Google's applications on the various platforms, Twitter, et cetera, they all have tabs. So basic tab navigation in Xamarin Forms is done with the tabbed page class. And tabs are going to show at the bottom of the screen with a UI tab bar controller in iOS. They'll show at the top of the screen with action bar tabs in Android. And then they will use a pivot control in Windows Phone. Each tab also hosts its own page, which is interesting because by hosting its own page, this tab can host, for example, a navigation page. You can see here that each tab that we're looking at, the sessions, the speakers, rooms, is still hosting that same list, and I could drill down individually on each one of those. So tabs are an excellent option for navigation when you have just a few sections of content, maybe 3 or 4 sections. In order to create a tab interface, we'll start by creating our custom class, deriving it from tab page. And then in the constructor here, all we need to do is add our new pages to the children collection of the tabbed page. Now, I name these tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, tab 4 page. These are just content pages. They could be whatever you want. They could be navigation pages, content pages, carousel pages. You can integrate all of these together. So again, we'll look at some code here. And I'm already on iOS, so we'll start with iOS here. And I'm going to go back to that app.cs class. All right, so we're creating a new tabbed page. In this case, I chose not to subclass the tab page. You don't have to. But what you end up with is in your app.cs file, you have a lot of lines of code here that would be better off being in a subclass. And then we're going to go add one tab. And you can see that this is a navigation page. And the important part here is the title and the icon. We need to set those, and we need to set those on whichever page you're adding to the tabbed page. So in this case, I'm adding the navigation page directly to the tabbed menu. So I need to set the title and the icon. You definitely need the title because otherwise you wouldn't know what tab you're selecting. And the icon is only going to show on iOS. Windows Phone and Android do not show the icon. Then we go through and we're going to add a few more. And these are also navigation pages you can see for speakers, rooms, etc. All right, so now we have the basic same application that we had before, except now we're starting out here with sessions. And we have the tabs, again, down to the bottom. You can see the icons that we have. We can still use the navigation page within the tab. Interesting thing on iOS is notice I have like 5 or 6 different tabs that I added, but there's not enough room on the iPhone to show all those. So what iOS will actually automatically do is if you have more than 5 tabs, it's going to wrap the extra ones up, put them in this More button, click the More, and you get a table view controller with a navigation controller that will show your other tabs. And the user has the ability to actually customize this. So if I really want to see who our sponsors are, but I don't care about our speakers, I can just drag and drop that. Your user can alter that however they want. You can control whether that is editable. And if you want that to persist, you'll have to write the code to actually persist what tabs are shown. It doesn't automatically persist across reboots of the app. Now let's take a look at Android. All right, so Android, again, you see the tabs are at the top now, but we still have the little blue bar under it to show us which tab we have selected. Again, we have some kind of context of our navigation now, which we didn't necessarily have before. And again, we can select back and forth. Notice on Android, you can scroll the tabs. So if you have more than about 4, you can still scroll over. But if you're new to this navigation pattern, if your users are new to it, they might not know that you can scroll over. There's not really a visual indicator there that you can scroll that. You just have to know that that's scrollable. So again, tabs are usually good for about 4, maybe 4 different sections. And back to Windows Phone. All right, so the exact same bit of code here. And now this is going to display again with the pivot control. So Windows Phone actually does give you some visual indication that there's more tabs off to the side. So you can see at the top, I have rooms, I have topics, but then there's that S. It's telling me that there's something else over there. And this is a common control that we use in Windows Phone. So the users are going to be used to this paradigm. So we can keep clicking, and it allows us to actually to circle all the way around. Notice here, when I select one of those, I'm now off the pivot control. With Android and with iOS, we always have the tabs showing, which allows the user to jump back and forth between different tabs very easily. With Windows Phone here, once we transition into the navigation page, we need to go back in order to get back to that pivot control. Just a different choice in the design of the app. Okay, so we covered the navigation page, covered the tab page. Let's look at implementing a master detail page interface with Xamarin Forms. The master detail navigation pattern is going to display a master list of items on one side and a details page for the currently selected item, hopefully at the same time on the same screen without navigating away from the list that you're looking at. This is great for screens like the Contacts app, where we have a list of people, we want to select one, we want to see their details, but we don't want to lose that list of people. The master detail page in Xamarin Forms is just a container page that manages the presentation of two other pages that are going to work in conjunction with each other. So you can think of the master detail page as the orchestrator or the organizer of the other two pages. Typically, you can see here, this is a list of items in the master page and the detail of that selected item as well. On the iPad, you can see here, it's going to render as a UI split view controller. On Android, it's going to be a drawer layout, and Windows Phone is going to be a stack navigation with multiple pages. Actually, it's going to be like a modal pop-up. So in iOS 8, which just came out, the UI split view controller now is able to work on the iPhone as well. But we wrote Xamarin Forms before iOS 8 came out. So on the iPhone, this will render as a flyout menu, which is a custom control. It's not included in iOS at all. I assume at some point the internals of that will probably change, but how you use the master detail page in Xamarin Forms will not, which is a nice abstraction. All right, so we're going to start by deriving a new class from master detail page. And again, keep in mind, this is just the orchestration page. This is what is going to set up the communication between the two. And then the constructor, we're going to set this.master and this.detail. Those properties are coming from that base master detail page. We're going to set the master to our menu page that you saw on the left side of that iPad screenshot. And the detail is going to be a navigation page of the detail page. This detail page is generally the same for every item that you select from the list. Now, because these are two completely separate pages, we need a way to tell the detail page that a new item was selected in the list. And we can do this by listening for that master page's list view item selected event, but we still need some way to tell that detail page about it. Well, what we can do, we have two choices. So you can see here we're down in the menu page. This is just a content page. We could either just add a regular C# event, and we could raise that event, and the master detail page itself would listen for that event on the sessions page. Or we can use Xamarin Forms' built-in messaging center to publish a message which the master detail page will listen for. And that's what I chose here. Either one is fine. But either way, the orchestrating master detail page is going to listen for this event. So here we're going to subscribe to that session selected event. We're going to get the detail page, and I'm setting the detail page's binding context to be the selected session. Because I'm using data binding in that detail page, simply setting the binding context is going to cause the detail page to repopulate every control on the screen with the currently selected session. And then finally, that last line of code, this.isPresented equals false. We need that because in Android and in iPhone, this is going to present as basically a flyout menu. So we need to, when we select an item in the menu, we need that page to hide itself again so we can see the detail. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we provide a title for the master page. The master page requires at least a title. This is a required property. You're going to get an exception if you don't include the title here. It's going to be a runtime exception. And we need a title because when we're trying to show a flyout, the only screen we see is the detail screen, and we need a button in the top left that we can touch and show the flyout menu. So we need some kind of title there. You can also provide an image by selecting the icon. If you select an icon, then that will be your button for the flyout. If you don't, it'll be the text that you set in the title. All right, so let's go back and look at the master detail. So again, in the get main page, we're going to return the master detail page. Notice again, we're deriving from master detail page. I'll go through and set the sessions menu page and the detail page. Let me go to my next step here. There we go. And we need to set that title or we'll get the error. Let's run this now. I've only done a few of my steps here. You can see we just have a white screen so far. Technically, there is a master page that's showing. If I was to run this right now, let's run this on the iPad instead of the iPhone. Which is a little bit big. So there, when I'm in landscape mode, you can see there is some information there, but we couldn't see that yet in the iPhone. We still have some work to do. All right, so all I did was I added a title. First thing we can do is we can wire up the item selected for that menu that we saw. And we also need to listen for that event. So here I'm in my master detail page. Again, this is the orchestration here, the page that is coordinating everything, and I'm going to subscribe to that message. I'm going to take off that detail page, and I'm just going to call update session on that detail page, which will rebind it for me. So again, we'll run this here. And I'm running this again on the iPad so we can actually see the menu. All right, again, our detail page starts off as blank. But when I select one of the master items, you can see that we're now rebinding the detail page, and we're updating that. So this, again, is great for hierarchical content where we have a list of items and we want the detail. So sessions and session detail, speakers, speaker detail, etc. Now, we saw that that detail page was actually blank when we first started. So what I'm going to do here in the master detail page itself is when I'm ready to start the app, I'm going to send one of those messages that says that we just selected the first session. I'm going to fake like we touched one of the items. That gives a little bit better experience for the user when they first start the application. They don't have a blank screen on the side. Instead, now it looks like they touched the first one. They've got a little bit of detail. And obviously, you're going to want to make it look better than just black text on white. Now, if I ran this here, again, in iPhone instead of iPad, let's take a look at this. We still have a problem. Now we get content, but we still don't have any way to show the flyout, to show the menu, which is strange because I set a title, and I told you that title is what you're going to press to show the flyout. But the problem is, currently we don't have any place to actually show that flyout. There's no place on the screen for us. So if we come back, we'll see, right now we're just setting our detail to be this new detail page. What we actually have to do is here, we have to wrap that in a navigation page. And that's going to provide the navigation bar at the top of iOS, which will provide some place for that button to live. And then we'll pass in that detail page. So in this case, my detail page, I'm not navigating anywhere from that. I don't have any navigation away from that page. But we still want it to be a navigation page so that we get the UI that we want. And when you're casting classes, it helps if you cast them to the right one. So let's go do that and cast that to a navigation page now. And now you can see we have our menu. I can select that. We get a flyout here. The flyout is pushing our content over to the side. I can select one of them and the flyout comes back. And we can also come back to our master page. We have the title already. Let's change that. A really common icon to use for this is called the hamburger menu. It's those 3 horizontal lines that you see very often when using a flyout. I'm actually not using a hamburger menu, but I am going to change this to an icon. And you see I commented out the title, which I just said was required. Let's keep that back in. And now we're just showing a book for sessions. Again, that icon is not going to show on Android or iOS. So let's not iOS, I'm sorry, Windows Phone. Let's go take a look at Android here. So we can select it. We see we get the drawer layout. This is coming from the Android components that you can get from the Xamarin component store. This is a built-in Android control. They were nice enough to provide a flyout menu with Android. And we get the same behavior here as well. And we'll do this for Windows Phone. Now, Windows Phone is a little bit different. It still has kind of the idea of a flyout, but what we do is we click this button down at the bottom, and this list pops up. This is your master list, your menu list. That's going to pop up here as a modal, basically, and we select one of them, and it disappears again. So, but notice if I click back, I'm not going back to that master page. I'm going just backing out of the app. So again, something to keep in mind. All right, so we've now seen 3 different ways to organize your content in your app. We're going to look at our final navigation pattern here, which is the carousel page. The carousel page allows a user to swipe left and right to navigate through pages of content. This is a common pattern for things like image galleries. You'll see this a lot on image galleries. I don't particularly think it works very well with just text, but images work very well. And because of Windows Phone's panorama control, which is built into Windows Phone, this is actually a great pattern on Windows Phone. You can see that here. On iOS and Android, though, it's rather unintuitive because there's no visual indicator to tell the user that they can swipe left and right. It's kind of an accident that they find it. So keep that in mind as you're designing your application. Now, much like the other examples that we've seen, we're going to start off by creating a custom class and subclassing the carousel page. We're going to do this, again, we're going to use this in the app's getMainPage method. Then we simply need to add the pages that we want to swipe through to the carousel page's children property. And these child pages, they could be any valid Xamarin Forms page. So let's take a look at the carousel page here. Whoop. I'm going to do this in Visual Studio first with Windows Phone because it's a much better experience. Okay, so here you can see that we are just returning a new sessions page from our getMainPage, or sessions carousel page, excuse me. And we're going to set the title, the icon, and then I'm going to go get all my sessions for the conference, and we'll loop through each of these here. All right, so for each session that I get, I'm going to create a new content page. And remember, for the carousel, it's going to take a collection of pages. So I'm creating a new one here. And then we'll just add a stack layout, some labels. And then we need to call this.children.add and pass that page. And remember, we're in a loop when we do this. So here you have the sample I just showed. Windows Phone gives this really nice panorama control. It lets us know that we can swipe. Panorama is a very common control in Windows Phone. Users are used to it. Notice that the sessions at the top is moving as I scroll through it. So that gives a good experience there. When we go over to iOS and Android, though, let's do the same thing, and we need to make sure we populate it with data. So the exact same code here. And I'll run this on Android first. And there, we get the content, we get the page, but again, there's no indication that we can do anything with this. Surprise, we can swipe. Again, this is going to work better with maybe images or adding some kind of visual indicator to the page, because again, we're displaying content pages, and I had a stack layout there, so what you might want to do is add something to the left and right, and put some kind of visual indicator there yourself, but there isn't one out of the box. And we have the same idea here on iOS. Where it gets interesting, though, is we can combine the two. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm creating a new tabbed page, and to that tabbed page, I'm going to add the sessions carousel page, the speakers, the rooms, etc. And now we get the tabs at the bottom, and we can swipe through the carousel as well. Now we have multiple levels of navigation. And we saw that again with the tab page and the stack navigation page as well. This particular UI ends up looking rather interesting on Windows Phone. What was that? There we go. So now we're doing the same thing. And we have a pivot control and a panorama control together, which is not something you see very often, but it does end up working. So you have multiple choices here, but we're also targeting 3 platforms. So what looks good on one platform might not look good on all 3. You have to be careful when you do your design. The other thing I want to point out is that for each one of these, we started in the app get main page method. The navigation page or the navigation pattern that you choose has a dramatic effect on your application. And it's usually the first thing that you show, the first page that you return. Notice that we returned, if we go back to our code, in the app.cs, we returned a navigation page, we returned a tabbed page, we returned the master detail page, and we returned the carousel page right from that get main page. So your navigation is usually the root of your app. The other important thing to notice here is how the navigation changed and how the experience changed as we moved through these. We started with the stack navigation page, and those choices, those navigation elements, were the first thing the user saw. They launched the app and they saw, do you want sessions, speakers, rooms, topics? And they had to make a choice. And then we moved to tab navigation, and we moved those navigation elements down to the bottom or the top and moved them out of the way. And the first thing the user saw in that case was actually a session list, which is valuable content when you're at a conference. That's what you want to see. And then we moved to the master detail page, where on the iPad, and we had enough room, yeah, we showed the navigation elements, but on the iPhone and the Android, it wasn't even on the screen. We had to click a button to show that navigation. And then the carousel page, there was no visual indicator at all. Our entire screen was content. And that's what you want to keep in mind. We have these big, beautiful screens. We want that dedicated to the content of the application. A navigation element is not something you're going to interact with very much. It's not something that you want taking up pixels when you're not using it. So when you're designing, keep that in mind. All right, so again, we looked at navigation page, tabbed page, master detail page, carousel page. Each app is different. Make sure to find the navigation pattern that's best for your application. We have some other great sessions coming up this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, related to some of the same ideas. So if you're interested in designing Android UIs or UX patterns for cross-platform mobile, extending Xamarin Forms with controls and layouts, navigation for Android as well. There's more. This is what could fit on the slide that really pertained directly to what we have here. And we have, I think, about 5 or 6 minutes. If anybody has any questions, I can answer questions. We also have Jason Smith here, is the main author of Xamarin Forms. And either one of us should be able to answer your question. Can we put the little ellipses on iOS on the bottom of the carousel?
The UI page controller, why can't I think of the name of the native element right now? You can get those in there. They're not on there by default. You would have to use a little bit of custom code to do it. It's just a little extension you do, and boop, they show up.
The second question I have is, I looked at all the exercises, and I didn't see this particular project in the code. Do you have it somewhere?
It's not public. I can send me an email. Let me show you my email again for anyone who wants contact. And I will find some place to put it. We didn't upload any of our, so right there, rob.gibbons@xamarin.com. We'll try to get all these demos. We didn't know anybody would want them, but a lot of people do. So we'll try to get those up somewhere. But if you're interested in them, either send me an email or tweet me, one of the two. I'll make sure you get those. Which brings up a good point, though. So last night we had workshops in every room, and we're going to do that same thing here today. We only have 40 minutes for the sessions, so the sessions are very kind of high-level, conceptual ideas. The workshops are meant for you to get some hands-on experience with these ideas. So make sure you go to the workshop today, 4 to 6 o'clock. There's tasks you can do, there's lab exercises you can do. You're going to go over this, get some hands-on experience with the actual code. I know it's hard to understand stuff on various sessions when we're kind of flying through the slides here. But definitely come to the workshops. They are going to be in each of the 4 rooms that we're working on. So if you are interested in, what's today, iOS, Android, fundamentals, come to one of those rooms. There'll be people there to answer your questions and help you with the code as well. Any other questions? Yeah.
You can use XAML to set up the navigation, but currently you have to use the X-arguments extension from XAML 2009 to actually pass in the root page. We're working on making it so you can just kind of do it as the content of the XAML page. It's not that different. It's just one extra node in the XAML. I'll show you how if you need me to do it.
So we have about 2 more minutes. Any other questions?
Oh, yeah.
Nope.
Are there any plans for supporting Windows RT or Metro apps? Yeah, there are plans for supporting Windows RT. I can't tell you it's going to be out super soon. There are other things in the pipeline ahead of it, but you know, it's coming.
So you changed from a detail page to a navigation page when you show the iPad. When you go to the iPad later, will there be displayed a navigation button at the top of the detail page of the iPad?
Yeah, so I'm running out of time. I might have time to do this, I might not. Let's see. So the question is, basically, what does the master detail page look like on the iPad with the menu? So there's our menu. We can click it. It's going to be the regular split view controller. So notice that this overlays the content instead of pushing it off to the side like on the iPhone. But that's going to work just like a split view controller.
It is a split view controller.
Right, which is why it does. So we're actually out of time, but thank you everybody for your time. If you have any more questions, come to the workshops. Find either one of us. We'll do our best to answer any questions you might have. So thank you.